Awesome. Thanks, Sasha. I'm happy to be here today. And as Sasha mentioned, yeah, if you want to put questions in the chat, my supervisor, Sarah Jane, who you might see on your screen, will be moderating a little bit in case there's stuff she can answer in the chat. And if not, if you wait till the end, we'll do a more formal question period then. So thank you. So confirming that everyone can see the presentation, I'm just going to switch over to my notes. So that
I'll just jump in. I think there's a few people who might be unmuted, so just double check to ensure that you are on mute. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome, thanks. So I'll get started. So I'm here to present on the early learning and childcare surveys that are done at Statistics Canada, specifically for children aged 0 to 12. So in today's presentation, I'm going to start by giving a description of the two surveys for which my team is responsible for. I'll then present some interesting findings and results from these surveys, and I'll also show you some ways we release the data and how to access said data on the website. And then I'll go over some of the other collection activities that are happening in the future for early learning and childcare surveys at StatCan, so what you can expect to see in the coming couple of years. So basically, at Statistics Canada, on the demand side, that's what we call surveys that are aimed at parents and guardians to get information about their situation with their children, as opposed to surveys that go more towards childcare providers and childcare centers. So we currently run two surveys that collect data from parents on their childcare arrangements for their children under the age of 13 years. The sample for each of these surveys is selected from those who apply from the Canada Child Benefit. These surveys were developed in partnership with Employment and Social Development Canada to provide insights on the federal government's Canada-wide early learning and childcare plan, which aims to reduce the average childcare fees by 50% by the end of 2022, and to provide on average $10 a day regulated childcare for children under the age of 6 by 2026. The first of many sentences full of numbers. The two surveys discussed in this presentation will be the survey on early learning and childcare arrangements. So you might hear me use the acronym SELCA, which was for children under the age of 6, which we've conducted 3 times since 2019, as well as the survey on before and after school care in Canada, which I might refer to as SBAS. We love our acronyms at StatCan. Which was for children who are in school aged 4 to 12 years, which we collected for the first time earlier this year. So just a bit more information about the two surveys. As I mentioned, both were collected in 2022. For reference, we always try and collect these childcare surveys during the school year, since childcare needs can be different during the summer months, particularly for children in school. The type of care they might be in July and August would be like vastly different than the type of care they might need during the school year when they're in school for 6-ish hours a day. In both surveys, parents and guardians were asked about their typical childcare use in the past 3 months. So the approximate reference periods for each survey are about winter 2021, 2022 for SELCA, and then spring 2022 for SBAS. Yes. And again, in 2022, we collected both surveys in the provinces only. This was just to avoid burdening respondents with other surveys like that StatCan is running, such as the Indigenous People Survey that was being collected in the territories. And we had about 11,500 respondents in SELCA and 6,000 for before and after school care. So as you can see, there is some overlap between the two surveys in terms of the population that we sample, since in SELCA, it's for all children under the age of 6, whereas for the before and after school care survey, it's for children school-aged between, children in school, because they're obviously school-aged, who are aged 4 to 12. So the 4 and 5-year-olds, because 4 and 5-year-olds can be attending school, so there is a bit of an overlap between the two surveys, but for the purposes of this presentation, the survey results from the SBAS will exclude 4 and 5-year-olds to be able to talk about two distinct populations from the surveys. So 0 to 5-year-olds from one and 6 to 12 from the other for the total population of 0 to 12-year-olds. And then just a few topics or questions that we had hoped to answer with the survey. So What proportion of parents and guardians use childcare? What type of childcare do they use and why'd they pick it? What are the barriers to accessing childcare? Why do some families choose not to use any childcare? And also, how much does it cost? We have not released that data yet, but hold tight. It is coming in the next couple of months, hopefully. So some of the first results that I'll present to you are some high level to answer the first question from the previous slide, what proportion of people use childcare? So in 2022, just over 50% of children under the age of 6 were in childcare, compared with 39% of children aged 6 to 12. Across the country, younger children were more likely to be in childcare than older children. You can see that in the graph as well. The blue bars are for the younger children and the orange bars are for the older children. In both surveys, a greater percentage of parents, oh, I forgot to mention, this is important. Throughout the presentation, I'm going to say parents a lot of the time, but I mean parents and guardians. It's just, it's going to get cumbersome to say it every time, but I mean parents and guardians, but I would just be saying parents. So a greater proportion of parents use childcare in the Atlantic provinces compared with Ontario, the Prairies, and BC. And Quebec had the highest percentage of parents using childcare for any age, although for the older children, New Brunswick did have a similar proportion of children in care. And this is primarily for Quebec, this is primarily due to the subsidized daycare program that has existed in this province since the 90s. And I'm also going to say another note about the data in this presentation, since there's going to be a lot of charts and graphs. For most of the charts, the numbers won't add up to 100% because the respondents could select more than one response for each question. So for instance, in this slide, children could be in more than one type of care. So if you were to add them all up, it would add up to more than 100, and you'll see that in subsequent slides, but I just want to put a disclaimer there at the beginning. So, according to these data, younger children are more likely to be in formal care, like a daycare center or home-based care or family child care home, compared with older children. For instance, 16% of younger kids were in home-based care, compared with 4% of older kids. And the survey on before and after school care in Canada found that kids aged 6 to 12 are more likely to be cared for by a relative, like a grandparent or sibling, than younger children. So 38% versus 26%. And for both populations, this was the most second common form of childcare that was used after daycare for younger children or a before and after school care program located in a school for older children. So among those in care, 1/3 of younger children were in care between 31 and 40 hours per week, compared with less than 5% among older children. And conversely, about 1/3 of kids aged 6 to 12 were in care 6 to 10 hours a week. So younger children are in care more hours, are in childcare more hours per week. And this can affect the choice of the type of care. For instance, for children less than 6, the majority of parents were using childcare for over 20 hours. So that represents about 71%. Whereas for older children who were in school, parents tended to only need up to 15 hours of care per week. That was 82%. So parents were also asked the reasons why they picked their main care arrangement, and those reasons could be influenced by the number of hours per week that their child will attend the arrangement. If they're in it for 30, 40 hours a week versus if it's just an hour or two after school every day. So this slide presents the top reasons why parents chose their main childcare arrangement. So you'll see the main reasons for the most common reasons for younger children, as well as the more common reasons for older children who are in school. So for both populations, logistics related concerns such as the location, the cost, and the hours of operation were an important concern among parents, with location being the most important for parents of both age groups, as well as the specific characteristics of the person providing the care was also important. The latter was a little bit more important for parents of younger children, and a reason for this could be that their children would be spending more hours in that childcare arrangement, as we saw in the previous slide. Looking for licensed care was less important for parents of older children as it didn't make the top 10, whereas it was it didn't make top 5, whereas it was the fourth most common reason among parents of younger children. So overall, about half of parents of younger kids had difficulty finding care, regardless of whether they used childcare or not, which is more than double the proportion of parents of older kids, which was only 19%, which you can see in the pie charts on screen. We asked parents, did you have difficulty finding childcare? This trend was reflected in every province, where a smaller proportion of parents of older kids had difficulty finding care compared with younger children. Um, Parents of both older and younger children had very similar difficulties when looking for care. So that's what you'll see in the brackets on the side is what did they have difficulty finding? They wanted to find care that was in their community, that was affordable, and for younger children, subsidized, and that fit with their family's schedule. Uh, we also asked, these were the consequences, yes. So for those who weren't using childcare arrangements, so for those who weren't using any childcare arrangements, 53% of parents of younger children and 13% of parents of older children had difficulty finding it. So not being able to find care can affect parents and families in a variety of ways. For younger children, the top 2 consequences, so that's what's in these 2 graphs, is what consequences or impacts did having difficulty finding care, how did that affect the families? So for younger children, the top 2 consequences show that one parent was unable to work due to needing to care for their child, whereas for older children in school, parents tended to modify their existing work schedule to meet their care needs. As you can see that the top 2 reasons are changing your work schedule or working fewer hours than they would have otherwise. For instance, more parents of 0 to 5-year-olds postpone their return to work, which you can see is the number 1 reason, but this would be higher among parents who were on parental leave with babies compared to parents of older children. So it might be that parents with younger children were able to postpone their return to work, whereas in the case of the 6 to 12-year-olds, this might be a less viable option because they had probably already returned to work or something. So, but there were lots of consequences and lots of impacts on families. And on the flip side, so we've talked a lot about people who were in childcare and what that was like. But on the flip side, we also asked a few questions of parents whose children were not in childcare arrangements. So about half of children weren't in any childcare arrangement for a variety of reasons. So 58% of younger children and 61% of older children were not in childcare. For both populations, for both age groups, at least 1/5 of parents didn't use childcare due to the cost. You can see that one in blue on your screen. The other reasons differ for not using care. As for younger children, the parents can still be on parental leave, as I mentioned, whereas the parents of older children can adjust their work or study schedules to be there before or after school to care for their child, because as we saw earlier, they tended to need care for fewer hours. It's also apparent that the parents of younger children were more worried about COVID, so you can see about 20% felt that it was unsafe to send their child to childcare due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which makes sense because the population for the older children for our survey, they had to be in school to be included in SBAS. So parents had kind of already assumed the risk of sending their kids to school. So only 4% of them had health-related concerns due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So there were a few other barriers that parents indicated as like barriers to why they weren't able to use childcare. For older children, these barriers included like a shortage of places or being on a wait list at 6%, and the lack of flexibility of hours of operation at 4%. And for younger children, it was the shortage of places or being on a wait list at 12% that were other barriers. Okay, so those are all the fun results. I'm now going to talk a bit about accessing the data because Sasha mentioned that a lot of you are users of the data or might want to be able to access the results on your own time. So now that you've seen some of the more interesting findings from our early learning and childcare surveys, here's how to find the data. So these are a bunch of links to the StatCan website, and they're all free to access for the public. So I've included links to our daily articles for each survey. So the daily is basically the first time that we release the survey results for each survey. We'll have a little write-up highlighting some high-level results, analysis, and link some data tables, which I'll get to in a second. So you have for both surveys, the most recent releases there. Users can also search for data by topic, survey, or keyword. And in that search, you'll find data tables, some which are released at the same time as the daily, as I mentioned, as well as some that are released later. When we see that there's a need for data, we might release, some tables a bit later after we've taken the time to do a more in-depth analysis. And for our ELCC, I think that was too many C's. For our early learning and childcare surveys, we also release what we call PUMFs, or public use microdata files. So these are available to external users to download for free from the website. And these are microdata files, so they have record level data that external users can download to do their own analysis. These are not the same like full master files that StatCan works with, since these are available to the public on the website. Some of the variables have been modified to ensure that no individual can be identified from the file. So for instance, on the file that I use, I have the very specific age of the child. Whereas on the PUMF, this would be too identifiable to have the specific age of the child. So we group the ages together to avoid identifying individuals. But this is still a really good tool for external users to use to do a bit of their own analysis, since our data tables are more like summary data, what we've decided is important data to be disseminated. So I'll do a quick demo of the data tables. Before I get to that, I will just talk quickly about the other types of ways to access our data, and I'll also show you those as well. So we have infographics, which are basically visual little posters for the data. And we also have the ELCC Information Hub, which kind of like pulls together all of our data, which I will also show you. So I'll start with the data tables. Some of you might be familiar with navigating the website and using the data tables, but for anyone that isn't, I'll just do a very quick demo. I'm just keeping an eye on the time because I do not have a clock. So I gave you links to basically the search of each survey, so it would have all the products associated with it. So if I click on Selka, I tried this before and it should work. There we go. So I assume you can now see the StatCan website. I can't see the chat, so I don't know.
Yep, looks good.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
So this is what it would look like if you were to search by the survey on early learning and childcare arrangements, and you can see all the data products associated with it. So our PUMF, public use microdata file, was the most recent thing that we released. So that's first, and then you can see our data tables. So you can click on one, and then from there, the website is slow. You can see all the data that we've released for all the reference periods. So for Selka, we've released 3 times. So there's 3 reference periods worth of data. And if there was more data that was hidden in the add remove tab, you'd be able to go in here and add remove, but I did not pick a good example. But yeah, that's the data tables. Let's see if I can flip. Okay, so I'm back in the presentation. So you have links to the before and after school care survey products as well as the Zelka products. We've also released a couple of infographics. So my colleague and I worked on one for before and after school care in Canada, and it came out at the same time as our daily article. So it's just a little poster, has a fun map, which is personally my favorite part. And it just has some high level findings about the survey. So just like reasons why people chose their main arrangement or reasons why they used childcare, didn't use childcare. One of the more interesting products that we create, it's not specifically my team, it's also other teams within StatCan that work on it, is the Early Learning and Childcare Information Hub, which will hopefully open. If not, I have a picture of it in the presentation. But basically, this is like a landing page, which has different pillars of ELCC or different interesting topics that you can click on and get more data about. These ones are forthcoming. But for instance, if you accessibility is one of the pillars, so whether like people have access to childcare or not. So if you click on that, you'll be able to see visual like visuals of the data as opposed to just like data tables with the numbers. You can see maps and graphs with the data from both surveys. So for the 0 to 5-year-olds from Selka, as well as the 4 to 12-year-olds from SBASC, you can toggle by the different populations. So if you just want to see for Quebec, it changes, or for Ontario. So that's cool. And then there's the different topics, the main topics that were in the survey. So most of them I touched on. So we have like the types of care, the reasons for using care, the difficulties that people encountered, and the consequences that they had, as well as some data on the use of childcare in the evenings or weekends, in the evenings or on the weekends. So that's all there. The link is in the presentation if you want to be able to poke around that data. It's very cool. Lots of good data there. So I'll pop back over to the presentation. I think that's all I had wanted to say about that. Oh, when you're looking at the data tables, you can also download the data file, either in its like the data file behind the table in its entirety, or just the data table that's displayed on your screen. So there are some download options, which I can show you quickly because I still have this open. So you can go to this download button and you can download as displayed. So basically you download the table as a CSV, or you can download the entire table. So it'd be all the data points in the table, not all the data that went into making the table. So that's very cool. That is the hub. Okay, back to the PowerPoint. So I had a picture of the hub and the presentation just in case it didn't work for whatever reason. So yeah, you all saw that. So looking ahead, so what's coming in terms of early learning and childcare data? So this week, actually yesterday, we started collection for a more detailed survey on early learning and childcare for children under the age of 6, which will continue into June, which is called the Canadian Survey on Early Learning and Childcare, or CSELC, which will collect the same information as SELCA, which is the survey I was talking about in this presentation. But since the Canadian Survey on Early Learning and Childcare is much longer and has a much larger sample, there are additional questions on childcare, as well as an entire module on the parent and guardian labor market activities, work-life balance, and such, which will allow us to do a much more fulsome analysis in the next couple of years on not just childcare, but like the familial situation around that. In addition, we'll have more detailed demographic information about our respondents. So more information about family composition. So knowing if there's more than one child in the household, as well as whether it's a 1 or 2 parent household, which wasn't available in previous surveys, because that can affect the childcare needs of the family, as well as ethnocultural data, such as place of birth, whether the person is a recent immigrant, and what we call our population group variable, which measures whether a person is a member of a visible minority or a racialized group. So that'll all be available from CSELC, and we'll be releasing that data when possible in the next year or so, probably more towards the year. Another difference between CELCA and SBASC as they are now and what we'll get in the future is there'll probably also be fewer COVID-related effects on the data going forward. So I just talked about the 2022 data this year in this presentation, but for CELCA, we collected 2019, 2020, and 2022. So in 2022, in particular, we saw a lot of impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic due to the lockdowns and the closures of childcare centers. So there was a lower rate of use of childcare overall. But the use of childcare among 0 to 5-year-olds has since returned to pre-pandemic levels in 2022. And since CSELC is a longer survey with a much larger sample, we will also have the possibility of getting high-level results at the sub-provincial level. So you will have noticed my entire presentation was either at the Canada level or at the provincial level, because with the small sample size of CELCA and SBASC, we're not able to produce any results at anything lower than the provincial level. But hopefully with CSELC, we might be able to do something sub-provincial. We shall see. This year, another team within StatCan will be conducting a version of CELCA targeted at children living with long-term conditions and disabilities to see how childcare needs may be different for this vulnerable population. So that'll be going out later this year. And as mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, both CELCA and SBASC collected data on how much parents and guardians paid for their childcare arrangements. And we plan on releasing these data later this year. So stay tuned. So that's all I had. I just wanted to talk quickly before I open it up to questions. I wanted to mention the Data Service Center within StatCan who coordinated with your group to organize this presentation. So Statistics Canada's data service centers are located across Canada in our regional offices, and they offer a wide variety of services, including general inquiries to locate free data and metadata, assisting with creating specifications for customized tables, customizing geographies and mapping services, as well as workshops, information sessions, I guess like this one, and webinars on various topics like the one presented today. You can direct your inquiries to our contact center at the phone number on the screen, or the email address on the screen, or you can go to the Contact Us section of the Statistics Canada website. So I will now go back to MS Teams so I can see what's happening. But if there are any questions, comments, concerns. Oh, I see a question.
Thanks so much, Kimberly, for sharing your presentation. Sarah Jane has helpfully been answering questions sort of on the fly in the chat. But if anyone does have a question to ask Kimberly directly, now is a great time to do so.
Hi, Kimberly. Can I jump in with a question?
Sure.
Thanks for your presentation. It was really good. 2 questions I have. The first being, you mentioned that in the near future, there will be information, demographic information, such as ethnocultural.
Yes.
Looking at what you call the population group variable. So is the respondent part of a racialized group? I wonder, will you collect more specific information as in around the specific race? Can people self-identify according to, say, Black, Caucasian, Arab, so forth, so that it's more, I guess, a bit more comprehensive, more detailed? Will that be, as opposed to just racialized?
Oh, yes. The way we release the, yes, we collect it as like a specific, I will admit, my colleague worked on CSELC, not me, but we collect it as like a specific group. Yeah, so you would say I think it even goes down to the country. But Sarah Jane, do you want to jump in? You're more familiar with this.
Jump
yes.
In? So I think if I heard the question correctly, you were just interested in sort of what degree of disaggregation we would have
Exactly.
around racialized Canadians in our upcoming survey.
Yes.
So that was a question. I think the answer would be, so yeah, we collect visible minority data or data on racialized Canadians sort of by group. It's sort of the standard question that we ask. So it does ask individual groups.
Yeah, it's not like a yes, no, are you racialized? It's like a specific group, and then we use that to like derive more
information. Okay, that's great, because
the only thing would be that just for CSELC, we're collecting information right now, and we would have to see based on the sample size and the quality of the data to what extent we can provide disaggregated data on that question.
Okay, that's great, because it would be interesting to see like how it correlates with income and poverty stats. You might have gone over this already, but will there also be, yeah, well, yes, there is, you do collect information on like household income and so forth, but will those two be able to, will there be a correlation or a comparison, some sort of link between the two? Like considering that you'll have the racial disaggregation, at the same time, will it, you know, be linked to household income, so you can see, is there a trend between, say, higher income or lower incomes as it relates to certain racial groups?
Yeah, I think those information are both being collected in the CSELC, and so some of our next steps as collection continues this year is thinking about our analytical and dissemination plans for the survey, which would be happening later on this year. And so what we usually do is we put out standard data tables that cross pertinent variables. And then we also include analytical information in an article, released in our daily. And then sort of, but we have to see how the data quality looks to see what we can cross. And then after the survey is out, there's other opportunities for custom requests and the pump and other analytical plans to go forward. So I think that would be the goal for sure of CSELC, is to increase the sample size so that we can like drill down into more disaggregated levels. So those plans are ongoing.
Okay, great. And finally, newcomers. I think you, Kimberly, you might have made mention of this, but will we also be able to access data around how newcomers are accessing childcare and if they have difficulties, newcomers to Canada?
Yeah, there's also variables around that. I think there's a place of birth, and then also whether the person has recently come to Canada. I believe it's within the last 5 years. And then we also have information that's linked, that comes out after the survey, so later in the year, linked to other sources like the immigration database. So yes, those variables are also included to really, like you say, look at the inclusivity angle with regards to early learning and childcare.
Thank you so much for all your answers.
Thank you.
Megan, I see you have your hand raised. Did you want to go ahead and ask a question?
I do. Thanks so much. 2 questions. So one, will the CELCA Children with Long-Term Conditions and Disabilities, will that survey also include a question around cost of childcare?
Oh yeah, cost of childcare. Yes, sorry, cost
For that-
registered in
for
my
that
brain as
specific group.
income.
That's okay.
I think it should, because I think that they are using the same base questions from CELCA and then are adding additional questions about like
disability?
identifying children with disabilities and then about disabilities. But I will admit that I have not seen the questionnaire, but
Okay,
I'm
and then
pretty sure.
for CSELC, is there a series of questions? You might have said this already, but I just missed it, around kids with disabilities? Is that, no? Will there be in the future?
So not, yeah, so CSELC is kind of like a huge survey, like in terms of how StatCan develop surveys. CELCA takes like about a year to develop and get out in the field, and CSELC takes like 3 to 4 years to develop and get out in the field. So the next one is only possibly planned for like 4 years from now. I don't know if the intent would be to do to focus on disabilities in the CSELC, since now we have the other CELCA, which is focusing on disabilities. We're not sure how the CSELC program is going to develop in the future, if there'll be like specific topics that are focused on, or if we ask the same questions 4 years later. I can't really speak to that at this time.
Okay, that's fine. I was just wondering about just the well, maybe I've got them backwards. So the CELCA
Oh.
is also for children less than 6. Sorry, I think I had them switched.
Do not worry, it is very confusing because they all have very similar names
man,
and they're all
well, we're in
for
government,
similar
we all love a good
populations.
6-letter acronym. It's totally fine.
Yeah, so yeah, so the survey for so CELCA is like early learning and childcare. And that's 0 to 6, basically
Okay,
to
great.
meet the age range, or sorry, 0 to 5, to meet the age range of the Canada-wide federal plan to like reduce daycare costs. So the survey for children with long-term conditions and disabilities is also 0 to 5, and the Canadian survey on early learning and childcare, because how many times can I say childcare today? Is for also 0 to 5. So they're all the same like ages.
Okay.
Different people, hopefully.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. The reason I ask is we do hear of centers that ask families with kids with disabilities to pay an additional cost
Oh,
or an extra staff person to be there for that, to accommodate those needs, which of course we don't want the family to pay those costs, but it is happening. So I'm just curious how often it's happening, and if you would see that end up being reflected in the data where those families are actually paying a higher cost for care than kiddos without any disability or diagnosis.
yeah. I'm pretty sure that the cost question is on the survey for children with long-term conditions and disabilities. The one caveat being that because the childcare fees can be decreasing now because
Yeah.
of the plan, I'm not sure how comparable the data is going to be year to year in terms of like, in this year they cost this much, and this like there might be some like noise in the data because like the costs are being decreased at the same time. So
Yeah.
but yeah, that's
It'll
super
be
interesting.
interesting to see if operators find a loophole where the overall cost per day is decreased as their base rate, but that there's an additional cost associated to families with kiddos with disabilities that's applied only to them and increases their costs. Anyway, thank you very much. It was really helpful.
Thank you.
I could, sorry, just add to what Kim said. Kim is right, like that our CSELC is being conducted at the same time as our survey of children with disability, long-term conditions and disabilities. So that will be kind of the control group. And since both will include information on costs and be collected at the same time, I think together those two data sources would be able to look to see if the costs were different. Of course, there would be a lot of other factors to control for as well too, like where they live, like other factors that are associated with expenses, like what type of care, if it's a center-based care or like home-based care. But we should be able to get at that. We should be able to get at that with the two data sources. Yes.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for adding that, Tamara. I know this has been addressed a couple times in the chat, but I think it's of interest to this group in particular. Kimberly, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the plans for the future to release data at lower levels of geography.
Yes. So we're only doing CSELC for the first time this year. So we don't have any historical comparison to be able to say like if we're going to have the sample size that we need to be able to release at the sub-provincial level. And I say sub-provincial because we're not sure if we could do like I like hesitate to even say it out loud. But we know it's of interest, so we do want to see if we could, but it depends on a lot of things in the data, namely the size of the sample, like how many respondents we get. So we hope to be able to release CSELC, so the Canadian Survey on Early Learning and Childcare, like to have data at the sub-provincial level. Whether we'll release it with our initial release the first time we release, like maybe not, but there might be the possibility of like custom tables or further analysis at the sub-provincial level. So we really hope, and our fingers are very crossed, but since we don't have any data and we haven't seen any data, I don't think that we can say with like any certainty at what level of sub-provincial we will be able to get at.
For sure. Thanks for clarifying that point. Were there any other questions for Kimberly?
I think we caught everything in the chat. Thank you, Tamara and Sarah Jane. I didn't read it all, but I saw your names.
Kimberly, I have a question. Was there anything about the survey results that were surprising to you?
Nothing's particularly like surprising in the data. We just saw some interesting results in terms of, for instance, the fact in SELCA that we were able to see that the use of childcare went back to pre-pandemic levels. That was something that was of like major interest, is that we collected for the first time in 2019 and everyone was like, yay. And then we collected in 2020 during the pandemic when like childcare was like heavily affected by like closures. And then in 2022 to see that like the rate had gone back up, it was like interesting to see. The types of care that people were using changed a little bit, but that was definitely one of the more interesting findings.
Great, thanks for sharing that. I don't see any more questions in the chat right now, but Kimberly did provide contact information in her slide deck. So if there are any further questions, feel free to follow up directly. I will say that the recording of the presentation as well as the slides will be posted on the Community Data Program website in the coming days. So that will be a long-term resource available on our website. I know there aren't any more questions. I'm happy to stay on the line for a couple more minutes just to see if there's anything that people want to address kind of in a smaller group. But otherwise, Kimberly, unless there was anything else you wanted to add to your presentation, I think we can bring it to a close.
No, I think on my end, that was it. I was just skimming the questions, but I think they were all answered in the chat. So on our end, I think that's it. But thank you all for coming. We love presenting our data, and I hope that it helps with the work that you're all doing and accessing the data.
Perfect, thank you. I do actually see one more question that just got posted in the chat. So will any future analysis or data collection enable urban, suburban versus rural comparison?
Yeah, we know that geography is of great interest to this group, and it is to us as well. So thank you for the question. I think and my team can jump in at any time, but the genesis for these surveys at the beginning was to really monitor the national program for providing affordable childcare that's being rolled out. There was actually a milestone at the end of 2022 in terms of reducing the cost of childcare by 50%, and then there's the next one of towards a $10 a day average. And so since the provincial jurisdiction, each province has sort of a different approach to how they get to that point. So that was sort of the initial raison d'etre for these surveys, was really providing sort of a baseline prior to the policy and then monitoring as it goes forward. So we know that there are other interesting purposes of these surveys as well in terms of research and policy. So going forward, we have to sort of like balance all of the priorities and see what information that we can get and down to what geographic level we can go. We also work with ESDC on this as well, because they're really involved in the programming around childcare. So we definitely hear how important geography is, and we know it's balancing it out with the other priorities that are important as well. So we'll see how CSELC collection goes this year in terms of providing more sub-provincial and also other disaggregated data at different levels.
Great, thanks for that, Sarah Jane. Megan, I see you have your hand up again. Did you want to jump in?
Sorry, I just forgot to put it down.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. It looks like there is another question. I know you sort of touched upon this, Kimberly, a couple moments ago with looking at the change before and after COVID, but will there be any data collection for measuring the impact of COVID-19 on childcare?
I do not think specifically.
I mean,
Data
there's some, Kim, like,
Yeah,
you can,
There's
like,
some
in-
in our surveys. There are like, we had as like response categories like, why didn't you use childcare? And it's like, oh, because I didn't find it safe during COVID. Like, I think there's a few instances where we have like where we asked them like, what were your reasons? And sometimes the reason that we gave them like that they could select was like, oh, due to like health related concerns during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're able to like look at the rates of use like over time since we collected
Exactly.
1 year before the pandemic and then the pandemic and now in the kind of post-pandemic world. But I do not think we have a plan to do like a specific collection about COVID, but there is data in CELCA and SBAS, but CELCA would be better for comparison because it was collected in 2020.
Yeah, the CELCA 2022 daily would probably have good information about the use of childcare over time, and you can
Yeah.
you can see how there was an impact in 2020 because due to COVID, and then some recovery in 2022. So that you can find that link at the end of the deck. Kim's slide on the links. You can have a look there for impacts of COVID on the use of childcare. And then there's other places too, as Kim said, in terms of like reasons for not using care, that kind of thing.
That's great, thank you. And yeah, as I said, those slides will be posted on the Community Data Program website in the coming days, so they'll be a great resource in the future. Great. Well, I don't see any more questions coming in the chat. Yeah, I wanted to just say thank you so much, Kimberly, for leading the presentation. I loved your enthusiasm about the topic, and I certainly learned a lot about childcare and the early learning survey. And then it was great, Sarah Jane and Tamara, to have you folks join in as well and help answer questions in the chat. So yeah, thanks again for coming and speaking to our group today. And then I just wanted to say that on February 8th, which is a Wednesday, a little bit different than our typical Tuesday webinars, where the Community Data Program is hosting like an open forum. So the registration link will be sent out in the coming days, and that will be an opportunity for members to come and ask myself or Mike or Jamie questions about accessing data through the Community Data Program. So I just wanted to put that out there as something to look forward to in a couple of weeks. So thanks again, everyone. I'll say bye now and look out for the slides on the website in a couple of days.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.